Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Hughes. I'm the CEO of Digital Leadership Associates. With me today is Meagan Davis, all the way from New York. Meagan and I are going to be talking about sales enablement, what that means, the impact on organizations, and why, as an organization, you should be in sales enablement. But before we do that, Meagan, tell everybody where they can get hold of you.
Absolutely. So you can reach me easiest on LinkedIn. It's just under my name, Meagan, is Meagan Davis. And you can also find me under the name Disarm Your Heart. It's a social channel that you can find on LinkedIn, on Twitter, or on Instagram. So you can follow me there as well.
Okay, cool. And tell us a little bit about yourself. So tell us your story about how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So just over a year ago, actually, I started working in business development for a compliance technology company headquartered out here in New York. And I started seeing a lot of success using social selling methods. And because of that success, I just started leaning more into social selling and learning as much as I could, getting really involved in the modern selling space. And based on the people I spoke with and what I learned in doing that, I'm now actively involved in sales enablement at the same organization. So that's where I'm at today.
Fantastic. So you've been finding success through social selling?
Correct, I have.
Good. I'm glad you said that. Otherwise, you might have been on the wrong channel. So we're going to talk about 5 keys to building a sales enablement program. But before we get into that, sales enablement. Can you explain to us what that is? You know, what if I'm a, you know, what and why do we need it? Sure, we have enough people in sales and marketing and operations and that. What is it?
Sure. So sales enablement, as I'm learning, is a strategic sales role. And what I found, at least in my organization, is that we have a lot of very impactful marketing content. And we have extremely talented salespeople, but there aren't formal communication channels between marketing and sales set up to ensure that that content, for example, is being inserted into the sales process to the correct salesperson at the right time. So it's really a strategic communication channel, and in developing a strategic process for that communication and for those exchanges to happen between sales and marketing. But surely you just put sales and marketing people in the room and tell them to talk to each other, don't you? Do you actually need a person to do this? Well, if you've ever spoken with a salesperson, I imagine that conversation would be highly dominated by the salesperson, not marketing. But jokes aside, I think that in smaller organizations, it would be harder to make a case for sales enablement. But I think as organizations grow and sales processes are more formalized, there's absolutely a need to make sure that marketing and sales are aligned, and definitely a need for a formalized process in doing that.
And I think one of the things that we see in both sales and marketing, and you can disagree with me if you want to, is that because sales is evolving, and so our marketing is evolving, and while people seem to want to fight things out on LinkedIn about whether we're this method or that method, I think sales has always evolved. We didn't always have email addresses. When I started, it might surprise you, but we wrote letters, and there was actually a typing pool. We didn't even have computers to write them on. Yes, and so things have evolved, even in a fairly short space of time, and will continue to evolve. And I think that having somebody that's actually bonused or with the mindset that they need to evolve with the sales team, allow the salespeople to go out, sit in front of customers, do deals, get in the revenue, but they're the person that kind of needs to keep moving the you can't see my hands, moving the salespeople forward, and also bringing that bridge between marketing, and that's what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I was recently at Sales 3.0 in Philly, and one of the speakers said that sales is a constantly moving target. And I think you're speaking to that exactly, that sales tools and processes and best practices are constantly evolving. And it's very important to have someone who's kind of like wearing the hat and responsible for staying up to date on the latest processes, tools, and techniques that are working, and that also has buy-in with the salespeople and with marketing and organizations to be able to implement that. So that's another very important, I guess, activity that is owned by Sales Enablement.
Excellent. So you've actually come up with 5 keys to building a sales enablement program. So do you want to walk us through that?
Sure, absolutely. So starting with the first key that came to mind when I was thinking about this, you really have to make a business case in your organization for sales enablement, because if you don't have buy-in, you're not going to get anywhere. And as I was thinking through this, I'm thinking there are a lot of very compelling and powerful case studies from other organizations out on the market. And I was thinking to myself, would that be enough? Like sharing that case study that is relevant to this other organization, is that enough to convince my leadership team and our salespeople that sales enablement would work here? And so after thinking through that, I don't have an answer to that one. I think there are a lot of resources to help build your own business case. And touching back on social selling was actually the way that I built my first business case, proving the need for a sales enablement program. And social selling is only like one small tool in the sales enablement belt, but by being able to use metrics that my company is familiar with, for example, like average days of average deal cycle, average deal size, the conversion rates of different outreach methods, by being able to put a sales enablement practice in terms that were understood internally, that was huge in, kind of like opening people's eyes to this thing called sales enablement and how it could help, like right now where we're at our company.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to take a business case. I mean, I think to answer your question, quite often, if you take a case study, the first thing people will say is that case. I understand the case study, Tim, but, and then you get the but, which is that's nothing to do with us because those people sell to life sciences, or that's nothing to do with us because they sell to what I think you call the government, which is what you call federal, or public sector here. That's nothing to do with us because. Rather than actually sort of opening up and saying, actually, here's an organization that is showing some best practice. Is there something that we can learn from this? But I still think for any organization, you've got to show that there's a business case. At my previous company in the sales transformation that I worked on, social selling was only part of it, as you said. We were taking a sales force from selling classic on-premise software, which took 18 months, to selling SaaS software, which we found took 3 months. And having an organization that was used to having 18 months worth of time to make mistakes and then go back and say we haven't, and actually 3 months is not a long time for a sales cycle. And in fact, we ended up doing deals in like 6 weeks, like overnight. It was just amazing how it just switched. And I think that competitive pressure, because it was coming from other SaaS vendors, you need to be able to move very quickly. And the sales force, as we talked about, the sales force are more bothered about the quarterly number and going out and sitting in front of clients. But there has to be a clear business case about why you do this. Otherwise, you'll have an individual and then you'll go, so what do they do? And it's like, well, we agreed at the board meeting that this person would do this. This is what their measure is. This is how they're bonused. And this is the impact they're making on the organization. We'll come back to that because I know we talk about reselling and feedback later on, but and I think so in my book on social selling, we come up with an individual. Matt and I, who wrote the book, I can't remember what we call it, but there was an individual that we wanted to that if you were going to train people on social selling, you had to have an individual based within sales that would do this because they knew it was the right thing to do, whereas everybody would generally go back to their previous behavior or habits. So absolutely. So in terms of, we've got a business case. We believe that we've got some impact on the company. What do we do now?
Well, next step after we have that buy-in from your shareholders is talking to people. Super simple, but talking to people internally at your organization and also externally. Some of those external shareholders being professionals in the space. And I found that Sales Enablement is a fairly new profession, a fairly new term, that a lot of the professionals in the space are more than willing to help and share the things that have worked for them, things that have not worked for them, and also just share resources that we learn. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, there's a social enablement society, isn't there, which is that you're part of, and that's a resource and a community that people can basically reach out to. It's actually why we're actually talking today, which is that they suggested that we had a talk about sales enablement, but that's a resource in the community that you can actually use, and you've done that as well. So tell us a little bit about that as well.
Sure. So yes, the Sales Enablement Society is a professional nonprofit that I got involved in back in November. And by way of social selling, looking up some videos, and I found that a lot of the videos on social selling were posted on the Sales Enablement platform. So that's one of the values of being a member of the society, is that you have this library of content and resources that can help you develop things like a Sales Enablement Program, or get more granular, talking about different social selling tactics or techniques. Additionally, it's an amazing network. So referring to how this conversation came to be, a lot of professionals in the space are involved in the community and looking to network and to exchange best practices. So yeah, the Sales Enablement Society has been huge in helping me determine how to make a business case, helping me form connections that are helping me establish a foundation. And I have tons of good things to say about the society.
And you talk about, in your second stage, it's about talking to people. And I think some of the things that we can do, if you could talk to the sales leaders, most sales leaders, if you sit in front of them, they'll tell you what their challenges are, in terms of what the market is facing, what their salespeople are facing on a day-to-day basis, and the issues that the prospects are facing as well. And I think it's important to be talking to those people, but also talking to the customers and talking externally. And finding, because I've had some amazing conversations with my customers in the past, where you sit in front of my background is selling accounting software, and sitting in front of finance directors and saying, okay, so what is it? What's your biggest problem? I remember sitting in front of a major telco finance director, and I said, well, what's your biggest problem? And I thought he was going to tell me some telco thing, and he didn't. Actually, his biggest problem was actually in fact that they've got over 1,500 shops, and in the shops there's always a flat above it, and it's actually managing the flats, and that was one of his biggest problems. And you don't find that out until you actually sit in front of the person, and they say, well, we have to collect the rents. And then the tap overflows or it floods, and we have to sort it out because they're actually the landlord. So he said that was actually a massive time-consuming thing for him. And you don't realize those things until you actually go and see the people. You think it's the fact that they haven't got enough masks, or or the mobile coverage or cellular coverage, as you would call it, isn't enough. It's not actually some of those things. It can actually be quite nuts and bolts in terms of what you're talking about. So buy-in. How do creating buy-in? What's the next thing? What are you going to do about that?
Sure. So we've built the case for ROI in the business. Talked to internal, external shareholders, and after that, we have a better idea of the more specific challenges that a Sales Enablement Program is going to help solve for these people. So in terms of creating buy-in, this is more about selling the vision for the program. So once you have a better idea of what the program should look like, it's about creating and communicating at a high level in a way that gets your internal team energized and excited about the project. And I think this is extremely important, and this is kind of where I'm sitting currently, to be honest. And what's important at this stage is building your foundation in terms of people internally in the organization that are going to be on board as helping you and excited about moving the project forward. So this is really it's creating buy-in, but it's internal selling, it's building your team.
Yeah, I totally agree. And internal selling is no different from external selling. It's still a sale. And you know what, the best way to sell anything is to sell high. You know, you've got the business case. You're explaining why dollars, pounds, euros, or what you're going to make from this. And whether you're doing it internally or externally, it makes no difference. You know, you need to talk to as many people as you can. You know, not just one person, not just the sales director, but, you know, operations and everybody that you can talk to, so they all buy in. I remember going for a job, and someone saying, you know, and I was sort of saying, well, what do I need to do in terms of the job? And they say, just treat it as it's a sale. And it's the same with so many things in life that, you know, that, as you say, energize people. If you do it externally, you need to do it internally as well. You need to understand maybe the change that they're going to go through. But that's fantastic, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Especially important in energizing people. I know you're talking about the different people you're speaking to internally and externally. And not to backtrack too far, but in addition to talking to people that are going to sign off on this program, you know, your sales, your marketing, your customers, I think it's equally as important to talk to sales people, the people that, you know, you're helping day to day, you're helping them do their job better. I think it's extremely important to be constantly communicating with them, have them understand the vision, have them understand that it's aligned with their goals of hitting their quota, etc. So, yes, lots of internal selling.
So the next thing is, and always the first question I always ask is, how are you going to measure it?
Exactly. Great question. And so in addition to how you're going to measure it, building out a sales enablement practice is a huge endeavor and something that takes a lot of time to complete, and also what those complete look like, because things are constantly evolving. So another thing that's extremely important is to create a roadmap and visualize and set goals for where you want to be 1 month, in 3 months, in a year, in 3 years, and highlight areas on that roadmap where you can celebrate little wins. Because if you embark on this project and you have your team on board and you don't get to celebrate a win for 2 years out, it's going to be much more difficult to keep people engaged and involved in the project. So really, this part is really about creating and celebrating small wins as often as possible. And after you communicate those wins, you can also just stack those on top of your original business case and continue your ROI story to your other shareholders.
I totally agree. I think, you know, you've got to have a 30, 60, 90 day plan. You've got to say what the deliverables will be, when you're going to deliver them by. And it may be that those slip, and you just need to go back and talk to people and say, you know, we thought that this was going to happen, but unfortunately the salespeople haven't taken it on board, and therefore we're going to move it out. But as long as everybody knows what they are and you manage that, most definitely you need a roadmap. You need to communicate, and most definitely you need to celebrate success. I think it's on page 1 of the management book that you need to celebrate success, and it's true. You need to do that. So yeah, great, and it does need to go back to the original business case. So we've got measurability. So what do we do next? in terms of your 5 keys to building a social enablement program?
Sure. So we touched on this one a little bit already, and the last key, although there could be, there's more. For the scope of this video, the last key is creating and maintaining a feedback loop. And I should actually say feedback loops because you're wanting to establish a feedback loop internally, so you can really stay aware of not only successes and failures of your project internally. I shouldn't say failures, but like you're referring to, maybe you miss a deadline or something. Staying aware of that, but also staying aware of the sentiment about the project internally. So creating those communication channels and those checkpoints for yourself internally. Additionally, you should be creating and maintaining a feedback loop externally. So sales process is constantly evolving, making sure that you're talking to the right people and keeping the right resources in front of you, so you can make sure that your sales enablement program is up to date, I guess, because those things are constantly evolving as well. So after you've established those communication channels and you're able to constantly have that information available to you, it's also important to have a process for immediately incorporating that feedback back into your plan. Because, I mean, A, that helps you constantly optimize, and B, if you're asking people for feedback, but it's not going anywhere, that's also going to destroy that feedback channel. So about really creating those feedback loops and then also implementing.
I agree. And I'd actually say that failure is important. And the reason for that is that some of this may actually be experimental. And we need to make sure that we have a culture that we actually say, we're going to do this. We don't know whether it's going to work or not. If it doesn't work, don't fire me. Just see it as we need to be. We need to be experimenting. Certainly, what I've seen in business over the last 3 years is that you go into the meeting and someone says, "Oh yeah, we did that 2 years ago and it didn't work." The whole of business has been turned on its head. We just don't know what will work and what will work and what won't work. And the ability to actually experiment. And one of the things that I think is important is having champions and finding those champions in the team. I used to have a guy who worked for me, Andy, and his dog had 2,000 followers on Twitter. It was a cute dog. He, we'd go to Andy and say, "Andy, look, we're thinking of doing this. Do you think it will work?" And he would be the barometer in terms of saying, "Okay, well, I'll give it a try." But he was fantastic because what you do is you give it to Andy. Andy would do it, and then what would happen is that other people would go to Andy and say, "How did you do this?" And he said, "Well, it was really easy." So in a way, we didn't ever have to tell anybody to do something. Andy always told them, because if we went to tell them, they'd deliberately not do it, probably. But Andy was kind of like and was our champion, and finding those champions and actually experimenting, I think, is key.
Absolutely. And I think in addition to finding those champions and then having that dialogue come from a different voice, I don't know if that's in terms of avoiding this hierarchical like command feel. It's like more of a collegial communication structure. I think that's important. And then also kind of going back to failure and why that's important. I think that we tend to, we want our own initiatives to work. And I think it's important when you're kind of an entrepreneur in a business and you're creating something, to not create a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when you see a failure, acknowledge it, take those feedback and incorporate. And I think that talking to your champions, like you mentioned, is a way of reflecting externally to make sure that you don't fall in that self-prophecy trap.
And I think that's key. Adam, my co-founder, and I, we insist on, we keep telling people that they have to challenge us, because we can't be in a situation where people just accept what we do or say, because Adam and I don't have all the good ideas. The whole team has all the good ideas. And if we say we need to do something, if we say we need to be working on our Facebook page, they may come back and say, well, I'm sorry, but B2B enterprise people are not going to be on your Facebook page. So why are we putting time and effort into it? It's just one of those things where we need to be in a situation where we've got that culture where we can be challenged.
Absolutely, that culture and that openness to that type of critique, and also the dialogue to make sure that exchange can happen. I think that's extremely important as well.
So Meagan, do you want to go back through your 5 keys to building a social enablement program? Let's just remind me what they are then, 1 to 5.
Sure, I'll remind myself too. So number 1 is building a business case. Number 2, talking to people internally and externally. Number 3 is creating buy-in. Number 4 is having quick wins, making it quick and measurable. And number 5 is creating and maintaining feedback.
I think you've just created the sales enablement methodology.
Fingers crossed.
For 2018, yes. Meagan, it's been fantastic talking to you from a hot London to a hot New York.
Absolutely.
And remind everybody again where they can get hold of you.
Sure. So that's why on my LinkedIn page, Meagan on LinkedIn, and additionally, search the handle Strong Your Heart on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram.
And your Meagan is spelled Meagan, and Davis is Davis.
Correct.
Because there are people do spell Davis, so Meagan Davis. Meagan, thank you very much for joining me today to talk about sales enablement. Have a good day.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.